All right. Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's having a good day so far. We are excited to have you join us. I'm going to let a few more people trickling, or there's a few more people trickling in now. So we'll wait just a minute or two to kind of let everybody join and get settled. While we wait for that, any of you that are new to doing webinars with us, we use this platform called Livestorm that you got an email from and logged into. Um, let me know if you're having any issues with getting your video showing. Let us know if you can't see us for any reason. You can do that in the chat. So I'm going to go through some of the features of Livestorm just so you know how to interact with us and interact with the platform while we do the presentation. So you should have a tab for chat. I'm going to put a message in there right now. Feel free to respond. Let us know where you're watching from right now. You have a questions tab as well, where if there's any topic that we hit, any slide that we hit, and you have a question about what we've said and you want to ask in that moment, feel free to use the questions tab for that. You can put your questions in chat as well. Either one is great. I'll be checking both. And then also polls tab. I'll add and submit a poll here pretty soon that you can respond to and be able to see live updates about where everybody lands on the poll questions. And I believe that is everything. So feel free. We've already got some responses. Memphis, Clarksville. Awesome. Yeah, let us know where you're watching from today. And I will turn it over to Sunny to tell you a little bit about Acumen and introduce the team.
Thanks, Kaylin. Appreciate that. Hey, again, name of the company is Acumen Technology. I'm Sonny Clark. We started about 5 years ago, and although it seems like a fairly new company, we've been in the business before. Keith and I've been in the business about 20 years each. We've known each other a little more than 20 years. Makes me feel old. One thing that's different about us, we're an IT service provider, and there's quite a few IT service providers out there, is that we focus heavily on security and business continuity. And we're not just out to kind of fix and react to issues, but we want to help you plan and be strategic. That's probably the biggest difference is our strategic planning when it comes to your business. And because of that, because of the strategic planning and because of the security focus, we do have quite a few financial services clients and healthcare providers. And again, we have some security conscious professional service providers too, people who think about security and do want to be a secure organization. Just nowadays, getting a virus or getting something doesn't just create pop-ups like it did 10 years ago. Now it creates downtime, it creates reputation problems. It's just a much bigger deal, and we think it's at the forefront of what we do when we think about IT solutions. So we appreciate you being here, taking the time to be here, and I'm going to go through our team real quick and just tell you a little about us, and then we'll get into the cloud stuff. Like I said, I've been in the business 20 years. I love IT. I like technology. I still play with technology, and even when I'm not working, I'm programming or I'm teaching kids how to do something. I just enjoy doing it, and that is something we look for people. We look for people who are passionate and who actually enjoy technology. They're not just do it because it's a job. They do it because they actually enjoy it, and it does make a difference because they're thinking innovatively. They're reading about it during their off time, and it's just different. It makes a different organization. So we like to focus on that. Keith Mounty, like I said, I've known him for over 20 years, and he's kind of the same way. He's I think one time he sent me a Excel spreadsheet he was super excited about because it solved a Sudoku puzzle. He put in the numbers and hit go, and he wrote a VB script that solved Sudoku. So again, we kind of geek out on this stuff even when we're not working and solving problems for our clients. It's fun stuff. James Farley, VP of Sales, and unlike a lot of salespeople, he's not just a sales guy. He's technical and he likes it, and he's always looking at the latest and greatest and the newest technology out there, and is truly looking to solve problems, not just sell whatever the manufacturer wants us to sell. We're out there really trying to solve business problems. And then Kaylin is in charge of our marketing and culture. She just helps us keep that culture going within Acumen Technology, keep people engaged, and helps us with our ongoing learning. And you probably got a lot of emails from Kaylin before this event because she's also in charge of our communications for our clients and internally. So we'll be presenting on the cloud. Keith will be doing the lion's share of the work on this because he is the most technical out of us. And he's always the guy who helps strategically plan these things and plan how our clients are going to use the cloud and what parts of it, et cetera. So with that, I will dive into layers of the cloud. What is the cloud? We get this from some clients, not as much as we used to, but some people still don't get the cloud, and for good reasons. It's changed over 20 years, and I feel like the marketing people keep putting a spin on it. And the cloud keeps changing what it means. So depending on what decade you ask about it, it might be something different. Usually, the cloud is some ambiguous space where it's not within your office. It's going somewhere else. It's like the cloud is. In the 90s, when you saw a network diagram, the cloud could have been the Bell South or AT&T. It could have been a wide area network. Now, when you think of the cloud, it's usually meaning Microsoft Azure or Google or Amazon AWS. It's meaning something more specific. It's applications. It's stuff that's not in your network but somewhere else. And it's in a data center, located, on the East Coast, West Coast, somewhere on the ground, not up in the clouds. Another thing kind of get the next slide. The cloud, means hosted. Usually, it means this application or this set of servers is not in our environment. It's actually somewhere else. Again, it can be a data center, just something as simple as a data center down the road. People even refer to that like as a private cloud. It's connected only to you, but it's not within your infrastructure. With that, I'm gonna let Keith kind of go into some network diagrams, and you'll see we intentionally use some old ones just so you can kind of see how we used to refer to the cloud, back 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, thanks, Sonny. So I want to take a minute to discuss a little bit more what the term cloud means, and go back to the origin of that term. For many years, like Sonny said, IT admins have been making network diagrams. I found this one that looked pretty old to me. And the convention formed a long time ago that anything on the diagram that didn't really need to be drawn in detail was instead represented as a cloud. So the cloud on the diagram just represented a bunch of stuff that you didn't really care about what was inside. All you cared about is your connection to that cloud and the services that were provided by that cloud. So a common example is the internet, as shown here. And as long as the internet is working, where it plugs into your network, where it plugs into your firewall, you don't really care about the rest of the details. All the inner workings inside that cloud aren't really important to you. And I'm speaking from the perspective of even your IT department. If you're not in a technical role, you definitely might not care. But even your IT people, they don't care what's inside that cloud. It's outside of your organization's control. On the next slide, we'll see another network diagram where there's a bunch of different clouds. So the point I want to make here is it's not just the internet. There can be many different clouds on a network diagram. Here we see different parts of the network where this person doesn't care about the details of what's inside. From their perspective, they manage the network, and there's different parts of this diagram that are outside their control. And cloud usually means offsite. It usually means in a data center. But interestingly, I've even seen on-site clouds. And that really confuses people. And that's where it's really important to understand the origin of the term is it's really a portion of your network that you don't manage, that you don't care about, that you can draw on your network diagram as a cloud. And that's all the detail you really need to know. Because in a lot of cases, now we're seeing, for redundancy, people want something on site as well. So it's any part of the network that that's outside your control. And now to talk about, kind of lay a little groundwork, we've got an analogy with real estate that James is going to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. There's a lot of one of the exciting things going on here at Acumen. We're in the process of in the very beginnings of building a new office building, and so we have been talking about real estate a lot, and it dawned on us that there's a lot. It's very analogous. The concept between where we do our work and that sort of thing, and these concepts of the cloud. And so one of the comparisons we often talk about is it's not dissimilar than thinking about where you and your business are going to operate. So you've got on the left here, we've got the idea of build your own building, which is what we're fixing to do. So there's a lot to it. You got to find property and surveys and all of the construction stuff. And then once you move into it, you're managing and responsible for everything: your insurance, all of your infrastructure, your furniture, your kitchen stuff, and everything to it. But then you've got different degrees of other ways that you could have an office building. You could lease an entire building shell. Maybe your landlord in that instance handles landscaping and the parking lot stuff, but you manage absolutely everything on the inside of the building, from your build out, your furniture, your IT infrastructure, the coffee, and everything that keeps your employees happy. And then probably one of the most common instances is you leasing a multi-suite, a multi-tenant building, a large building downtown, or in Cool Springs or Maryland Farms, one of these big multi-tenant office buildings, where the landlord provides the building. They've done the build out. There's some common infrastructure in there, like restrooms and stuff like that. But you bring your furniture, you bring your coffee and computers, and it's a relatively easy way for your employees to get to work. And then the very last is leasing co-working spaces. We got eSpaces here in Nashville, and the WeWork facilities, those sorts of things, where literally it's super easy. You pay your rent and you show up with your computers and your folks and get to work. So as we continue to talk about the cloud, there's that many different versions, and it's pretty similar. So as we go through the stuff today, three of the concepts that we're going to talk about is SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. So it's SaaS is software as a service. We got platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, and we'll talk about each of those and kind of how they're unique. You can hit the next slide there, Kaylin. So software as a service, probably the first one, and the one that everybody's going to be most familiar with. There's going to be Microsoft 365, your Excel and Word Online and SharePoint, Google Workspaces, Salesforce, QuickBooks Online, those sorts of things. Then Keith will talk about platform as a service, which is a little more confusing. But this is things like managed SQL instances, like using SQL as a service, not like having SQL installed inside of a server, or Azure Active Directory, Azure Files as a service. And then lastly, he'll talk about infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service is things like Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, where you might be using servers as a service, but as you configure those servers and you provision compute resources like processors and RAM and disk space, you're not actually consuming a physical disk and a physical processor in there somewhere. It's virtual. You're renting a subsection of a resource from a great big farm of equipment somewhere. So that's it for that.
Thanks. Yeah, on this next slide, we're really getting into the details about the different layers. And on this slide, we see a representation of your technology stack. So I want to first get into what the technology stack is, because that kind of same thing as saying layers of the cloud. So your technology stack refers to the different layers of technology that exist to allow your organization's applications to function. As an end user, you fire up your programs and they run, but there's a lot of different layers of technology behind the scenes to make that happen. There's physical data center space. Maybe it's just a janitor's closet, but there's somewhere where your servers physically exist, where there's redundant power and cooling. You've got the physical servers that run probably VMware or Hyper-V or some sort of hypervisor. And then there's virtual servers that run Linux or Windows Server. There's the software that runs on those servers. There's the networking gear that connects it all together. All working together to deliver the programs. So I'm not going to actually get into the detail of all these different boxes. On this screen, I wanted to start by showing you a diagram from Microsoft's site. Basically, you can see that it's just trying to illustrate there are different types of offerings. The ones James just talked about, you've got on-premises, or the different infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. As you move to the right, you've got the provider managing more layers of your technology stack. But interestingly, they show that under the SaaS model, the provider manages all the layers. And I think this type of marketing has created misunderstandings. I've had clients where we've been talking to them about, replacing the switches at their office building or upgrading their firewall. And they've said, well, why do I need to do that? My stuff's all in the cloud. Why do I still have to replace all this stuff? I thought I got rid of all that. And I think diagrams like this kind of do a disservice because they're not showing that there's still, even under the whole all-in SaaS model, there's still some layers that your organization is responsible for managing. So if you go to the next slide, I made my own version of the chart with some extra columns and some extra layers as well. And starting on the left, I want to kind of really dig in and talk through this because this is really the crux of what we're talking about. So the answer to the what are the layers of the cloud, it kind of refers to what layers of your technology stack are going to become a cloud on your network diagram. What parts are going to become something that you just don't care about, that you don't have to manage, that you've outsourced to a cloud service provider. So as we start on the left, on premises, you've got all these different layers, and in red are all the ones that you're managing in that model. So all of them. Data center space means that you're responsible for the physical space, the cooling, the power. Data center connectivity means that you've got to have redundant internet or WAN connectivity. The physical hosts means you're going to want to have some hardware that's hopefully redundant with warranty support. You're going to have to manage the replacement cycle, capacity planning on that hardware, firmware updates, hypervisor configuration and support, updates, patches, all that kind of stuff. On the virtual machines, you've got operating system configuration and support, patches, upgrades, antivirus software, all sorts of good stuff there. Then you've got the server applications that run on top of the virtual machines. Those have their own configuration and support to deal with patches and upgrades as well. And then we get into stuff that wasn't represented on the previous diagram. Even with all of that, you've got the client side connectivity. So wherever your laptops and workstations exist, you've got switches connecting them together if they're wired, or wireless access points if they're wireless. You've got firewalls to worry about, the redundant internet and WAN connectivity for your clients. If they exist in a different spot from the servers, you got to make sure wherever your clients are working, they've got good internet connectivity. And then you've got the client devices themselves, which is a lot because there's a lot that goes into this. There's the hardware replacement cycle, the operating system, configuration and support, patches and upgrades, and then the endpoint security of those devices. You've got to worry about making sure they're encrypted, that they've got antivirus software, that they've got some sort of intrusion detection, web filtering, all sorts of good stuff on the client devices. So there's a lot to it. So on premises, you're in charge of managing all those different layers. As we move up, there's one version of the cloud that doesn't get talked about too much. Microsoft didn't talk about it because it's not something they offer. But one intermediate step is a co-location facility. And you can kind of think of that as a very physical manifestation of the cloud. I think it's interesting to visit these data centers and see the rows after rows of servers humming away. And you could decide, I still want to manage my own physical servers on up, but I really want somewhere where I get the physical space with the redundant cooling, the redundant power, redundant internet connections, all of that stuff is at least handled. I'll manage everything else, but I really want to have a place where they can all live so that, even if one office goes down, I know I can get to my servers from anywhere. So I've got that side of things handled. Then as you go up the offerings, infrastructure as a service means I still want to run my own virtual machines. I want to take care of the operating system, take care of all my programs, but I don't want to buy the physical hosts anymore. So in this model, you can use Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS to purchase virtual machines for a monthly fee, where you get that virtual machine that has all sorts of hardware redundancy behind it, and you worry about that part of the stack on up. The platform as a service offering takes one more layer away where you don't interact with the operating system anymore. You simply have Active Directory as a service where that is there, or Azure Files, or a SQL Server instance. And you just see the SQL Server instance, but you don't actually manage the operating system. And then finally, software as a service is the model of the cloud that takes the most layers of your technology stack outside of your management. where the server applications themselves are handled by the provider. So Office 365 is a good example. You know, everything in Office 365 is taken care of. And you just have to worry about making sure you're connected to the internet and you manage your endpoints and you connect to those services. And with all that said, let's move on. And there's a couple common questions I want to touch on here. What is a cloud tenant? So that's a new term for a lot of people that you might start hearing the word tenant. And since we were just talking about real estate earlier, we can make the connection that the tenant is the organization that exists in another provider space, just like in real estate. So a cloud tenant is your organization's account and kind of your organization's piece of the cloud within that service provider. And it's a term that was created to distinguish from just saying account, because an account can mean an individual user account, but a tenant refers to the kind of account of the entire organization. And within a tenant, there's various administrator and user accounts that exist within the tenant. So it's kind of broader than an account. It's your entire kind of piece of the cloud. And then another confusing thing is single tenant versus multi-tenant. And now the new terms for that are basically private cloud and public cloud. It means pretty much the same thing. So single tenant, of course, it means that you're on something that's dedicated, and multi-tenant, it's shared, you know, with other tenants. Private cloud, same thing. Private cloud, single tenant. Public cloud means it's multi-tenant. But the point I wanted to touch on here is that it gets really confusing for the exact stuff we're talking about here, because there's so many different layers to the cloud. So one person saying that something is private cloud, they might just be referring to the first, you know, the top few layers are private, but other layers are still shared. So it means different things. I was just looking at an offering from this cloud network management platform. And they had the option of a public offering or a private one where you had your own separate instance. But even though they had a private cloud offering, they talked about how you could run your private cloud in Azure. So the funny thing there is, well, Azure is considered a public cloud because it's multi-tenant. There's lots of people that can sign up for Azure, but you can run your own private cloud of this software in Azure, as opposed to you directly from that vendor, and it's Extreme Networks. It's their wireless access point management system. So you can go directly to Extreme and get their public version, or you can have your private version, but run it in a public cloud. And it's because we're referring to different layers. To what extent is it private, and to what extent is it public? The answer is that usually it's public and shared at some level. So it can get confusing. So you really have to dig in. People tend to want to market things as private or dedicated or single tenant because they know that people tend to like that. But usually behind the scenes, to get the economy of scale, there's some degree of shared or public or multi-tenant. So it gets interesting there. So with all that, I'll turn it back over to Sonny to talk about what might be right for your organization.
Thanks, Keith. And hey, I know that was a lot of information that Keith just rattled off. It comes naturally to him, but if you have questions, please throw them in that chat box, and we will answer them here in a few minutes. We have about a few more slides, and we'll do some Q&A. I want to hit this question: which one is right from organization? Because that is something we get from our clients. Like, they're not ready for the cloud, and we say you don't have to go all in. It's okay, and you're probably already using some form of the cloud anyway. So I want to just hit on a couple of these. You know, the first one, software as a service. You know, you think like Google, Gmail, or Microsoft Office 365. Salesforce, you know, a CRM product, a HubSpot, you know, those are software as a service, and those are easy. You know, if you're using an on-premise application, you're going to upgrade it. You have an EMR application and you want to upgrade it, instead of buying all the infrastructure, it might be a good time to go just software as a service, just for those one or two apps. It's an easy way to kind of try and kind of get into the cloud a little bit. You think of platform as a service. James brought up a great example is a SQL server, right? To run a SQL server, say for a back end of SAP Business One server, it takes a lot of resources and it's a huge server. But if it supports Azure, you can go to Azure and say, just spin me up a SQL server. Like, you don't have to do anything else, no Windows, just a SQL Server service. That's all you're paying for. And then it's much easier to manage because you don't have to have a dedicated backup. You don't have to worry about all the infrastructure that goes along with a SQL Server. You just spun up a SQL Server, and it's a service. So that's another idea of what platform as a service is. Just some of those platforms you'd run on top of a Windows server, you can just run as a service out in the cloud. You can do development out in the cloud, so you don't have to have your own test bed in-house. Platform as a service does take the support from the software vendor, though, so it is a little more complicated because not all software vendors support those type of applications. Infrastructure as a service, I think the easiest one there is you're running a legacy application in-house and you have hardware that's old and you need to upgrade it, but you don't want to mess with the legacy application. Sometimes it might be easier just to virtualize that and throw that onto Windows Azure as a virtual computer, and that way you don't have to mess with anything else. You just kind of lift and kind of call it forklift and move it over to the cloud. And that's a great way to kind of get into the cloud without doing a lot more work. So those are kind of the main difference and some examples on those three options. Can I get the next one? And this is key, right? When you go software as a service, you don't have to move your entire network. Just move what makes sense to, and it doesn't always make sense to move everything, or sometimes nothing. But sometimes you can look at a few apps and evaluate: do we invest in all this new infrastructure, or just move a few things out of the cloud? You can connect them. You can use a single sign-on to connect, so it's not hard to have some things in the cloud and some things on premise. There are easy ways to make that happen, and you can do it all securely. We always use multi-factor authentication on everything, and we try to federate the accounts so you don't have to have a lot of different accounts to do this service.
So yeah, building on what Sonny just said, the common question is, what do I do? How do I migrate from on-premise to the cloud? It's tricky because a lot of it depends on the vendors and the programs you use. When it comes to SaaS offerings, it's usually going to be an entirely different application. You're going to have to decide as an organization, we're switching to a different program. You're going to have to decide, I'm going to migrate from my Exchange server to Office 365, or I'm going to migrate from my QuickBooks to QuickBooks Online. That's going to be a slightly different version of the program for that SaaS offering. So you have to really decide at a strategic level, we're going to pick programs that are SaaS based. And like Sonny said, PaaS can be a good middle ground, requires vendor support. And the infrastructure as a service can be a good place to start, where it might require vendor support, but in a lot of cases, they're agnostic about where their virtual machine runs. Most vendors support virtualization nowadays. They're thinking you're going to run it in-house, sometimes VMware or Hyper-V or something like that, but they usually don't care if you run it in Azure or AWS instead. It's all just a virtual machine. So that's got broad support from a lot of different vendors. And one thing I want to point out, it always gets tricky. It's a catch-22 because you realize the most amount of savings when you really get everything to the cloud, when you no longer even have to have a server closet and you no longer have to have a host at all. But it tends to be a catch-22 because people are sometimes saying, well, I've already got the server closet, I've already got this hardware, so why don't I just spin up one more virtual server here? And it kind of creates this cycle where you're stuck, you're locked in on premise. So it's tricky. You really have to think, really roadmap this out, and we're here to help do stuff like that. But really think about, what can I start with so that I can eventually get there? Maybe it's a few years down the road, but how do I begin, dipping my toe in the water there, testing out the cloud, putting something in there. So the next bullet point, can I migrate one or two servers? Yes, absolutely. Test the water, put a couple servers in, start to get comfortable with the cloud. It gives you the opportunity just to, if you haven't messed with it before, have something in there, see that it's not so scary, get to learn it, and just get comfortable with that idea. And then one final thing that people sometimes get a little bit confused about is, how does the cloud compare to hardware as a service or leasing? The parallel here is that on-premise usually comes with some capital expense. It's some big new expensive server or a bunch of new licensing for the new version of Windows from Microsoft, or a big project to upgrade something. So it's usually a one-time big capital expense. And the cloud tends to make that more of a monthly expense. So it sounds sort of the same as hardware as a service or leasing, but Hardware as a service, or it's just basically renting hardware and leasing. Those are financing models. It's a different financing model for doing any of these different layers. Whereas the cloud is a service delivery model. It's a management model. It's about what layers are you going to manage versus what layers of your technology stack are you going to let a cloud provider manage. And it usually means the services are being delivered in a different way. Whereas hardware for leasing, just a financing model. Am I going to pay for it up front or pay for it over time? So very different things. Although I guess you could use either one to accomplish spreading out some expense. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit. And I will turn it over to Kaylin, who might be keeping an eye on questions from the audience, right? I haven't been looking.
Yeah.
Do we have anything?
No, we do. Yeah, we have one from Peter. If you can click over, right, and see it, Keith.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, I've got too many
awesome.
windows open here.
Oh, you're fine.
There's a question about CapEx and OpEx.
Yeah. So perfect. Exactly what I was touched on here. So that's really a financing thing. That's really, I see that's up to your kind of CFO on, do you want that CapEx or OpEx? I see that as more of a financing decision. You know, I certainly love the cloud. I think that's tends to be the preference of IT people. IT in general is getting more complicated. We're specializing more and more, and we see it in our organization. We've got more and more different levels of support that specialize in different things. It's years ago, Sonny talked about how we've worked together for more than 20 years. It just wasn't a big deal to install a server, install Windows, install the program. It was all pretty simple. You could be done with that at the end of the day. And now just the layers of the hypervisor and VMware and patches and everything just gets so much more complicated. So it's very difficult for anyone but the largest organizations to really do a good job at managing that full stack. Even working with a partner like us, we would prefer to focus on managing the servers, not necessarily managing the virtual servers, not necessarily the physical hardware, the data center space, the power, the cooling, and all that. So even as an IT company, we encourage our clients to outsource some of those layers to a cloud provider that can do it at such a scale that you can't compete with it. So I don't know if I touched on that too much. Yeah, and you want to add something, Sonny?
Yeah, I was gonna say the one place, whether it's CapEx or OpEx, the one benefit if you do have an environment where you have busy seasons is because we have some clients who do have that, where we add, you add a couple servers in October, November, and then spin them back down the other 10 months of the year, right? So regardless of how you classify it, one benefit it does has, if you're going to buy these servers, you have to buy for the peak times. You can't buy for the average. You'd have to buy servers for the busiest times you're ever going to have. And that is one benefit that, sort of related, I guess, because it kind of smooths that out.
I was going to bring up, Sonny, one of the things that that CapEx versus OpEx makes me think of, because we talked about software as a service and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, but because it's not necessarily have anything to do with the cloud, we didn't talk about hardware as a service, which is another one acronym sort of that we see all the time in our industry, but it's somewhat applicable because oftentimes we do see service providers like ourselves or other ones out there. They might going in the pursuit of converting something to an operating expense. They might provide firewalls, for example, and manage those firewalls and provide some security services and things around that, as well as maybe servers, hosted servers in a data center somewhere, and deliver those as a service. So you're basically just renting the servers, but it's still different than infrastructure as a service, because there's actually a server or actually a firewall or actually some piece of equipment that you're paying for that specific of equipment. Whereas in the infrastructure as a service, when you build out your virtual server and you're picking how many cores and how much RAM, it's not like when you choose 64 gig of RAM that somebody in the Azure data centers getting a 64 gig stick and going and put it in your little thing. You're just carving off a segment of a distributed set of infrastructure.
Yeah. And Keith, do you see that question?
I see the next one now. So how do you feel about multi-cloud strategies for applications? Does it ever make sense to host the same app across Google and Azure, or do you find that you diversify cloud providers across the portfolio, not within the same app? So for the size clients that we work with, and we tend to work with smaller, medium-sized organizations. Our largest clients, about 1,000 users. And for those size, I think it really makes sense to stick with a single cloud service provider. They're not large enough. So sorry, depending on the organization size, I guess is the answer. But then I'll get into same app versus different apps. For the size clients we work with, it's probably going to be a matter of picking one. As a Microsoft shop, we tend to focus on Azure. That tends to be the strategy from a lot of companies, and Azure's seen a lot of growth because of that. AWS started out with a lead. They're still the number one provider, very good platform as well. I don't think it matters too much which one you pick, but it tends to be easier to manage if you put everything in one cloud. There's so much redundancy available to spread things across different data centers, different regions, so many layers of availability that I actually think you increase the risk of downtime through complexity of the engineering by having a multi-cloud strategy than if you use the tools that are available to you within one cloud provider. Both AWS, Google, Azure all have so many layers of redundancy and so many options for distributing the workloads that I would tend to stick with that. So certainly the question was specifically for the same app, even in a multi-cloud organization, a large organization, I think, again, because of the complexities with it, unless you're a really, really large organization, it's probably going to be risky that you're going to have downtime related to complexities around how that's engineered if you try to split the same app across multi-cloud. In cases where we do have, let me back up. We have cases where we have clients that have legacy stuff. Maybe we inherited something from a different cloud and it's still lingering around. It tends to be different apps though. And that's not so bad because you don't have the complexity within that one app, crossing multiple cloud providers.
And we do, I think, Keith, when it comes to backups, right, we'll do a cloud backup to a different cloud provider when it comes to like SaaS apps.
So yeah, right. As far as backup of the actual data.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll always, you can have geo-redundant storage, but of course, at the end of the day, you might be worried something crazy could happen where it knocks out the geo-redundant. It's probably going to be some sort of software glitch or malicious actor that if it's all connected, maybe there's some possibility. So yeah, we tend to back up the data itself. So if some crazy catastrophe happens and all of Office 365 is wiped out, at least you've got your email data backed up at a completely separate provider. Same thing with, backing up servers. You can back that up and put that somewhere else. And there's another question. The cloud is appealing from the standpoint of less maintenance concerns, but then you have to deal with the quality of service concerns. If you don't control it, you become dependent on someone else's response time. Do you see this as a decreasing issue? So this has been, I've had that question asked a million times as we think about moving people to the cloud. The fact is, I would rather, and I hope I'm not shooting ourselves in the foot here. I think we do an amazing job for our clients. We try to build in all the redundancy we can, but we tend to be limited by budget constraints. We might have redundant hosts and redundant internet connectivity, but we will never have the same amount of redundancy as Microsoft or AWS or Google. So we always see, on average, better uptime, better availability by putting something in the cloud. It might not seem like that every once in a while when something's down because it's outside your control. So I think we feel it more because, we can't go do something. If we could go work on it and go pull an all-nighter, maybe we're not just thinking about it as much instead of just hitting refresh on the health screen, on the service status screen.
Right. You feel more productive if you can actually you're working in front of it and you can tell the client, I'm working on it.
Yeah. If I can think about the all-nighters I've pulled because a host failed and it was just a single host, I'm trying to pull this thing off a backup, or, an app, upgrade botched and we're rolling it back. I mean, just all the things we used to deal with that now just you're not worried about. And yeah, there have been some pretty high profile outages from Microsoft and they need to do better. And AWS, there was that one, gosh, I guess the most recent one was AWS that knocked out their blob storage, took out all sorts of people for a little while. So I think it makes the news because it's so widespread, such a big impact. But overall, I imagine their uptime is probably better than most organizations can develop in-house.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I think, Caitlin, it looks like that's it.
Yeah. Yep. All for questions.
And I know Caitlin's eager to give away some her, whatever this president, I'll let her talk about it. But real quick, I want to mention that, we talk to prospects and future clients all the time, and we find out that they went to the cloud, or they went partially to the cloud, or they moved a server to the cloud, and they stopped and they didn't go the next step of securing it, making sure it's backing up, making sure it's redundant if it needs to be redundant. And we do these assessments, and they're kind of eye-opening to them, that they thought it was all being taken care of because it was in the cloud. So they thought it just all happened, and it doesn't all just happen. You do have to still manage it at that level. And so the people who are here, we want to offer, an assessment, a cloud assessment. If you have moved to the cloud, or you have some cloud applications out there, we are doing a half-off assessment for people who want to do that this quarter. Just reach out to myself, James, Kaylin. You get the registration link from one of us, and we'd love to talk to you about assessing what apps you have in the cloud, or what you've got out there, and just we've invested in a tool so that helps us kind of assess that environment. We love to help you out and kind of see the blind spots that you don't see right now. And with that, I'm gonna get to Kaylin and let her talk about the giveaway.
Awesome. Yeah. And with that, with what Sunny said, as far as contacting us goes, feel free to connect with all four of us on LinkedIn as well. Our Acumen Technology profile on LinkedIn is where we always post invites to these types of events and other just tidbits of information. So feel free to connect with us on there. Great way to shoot me a message too if you have any follow-up questions or are interested in the cloud assessment. So, all right. So our giveaway, this one is really cool. I've never used these. I've have friends that have them, heard good things about them. These are a sports style version of the audio sunglasses that Bose has made. So great for being outdoors, doing anything outside. Picking these types of giveaways is not my wheelhouse, but we have an employee at Acumen who always knows what the latest and greatest and neatest gadgets are. So this is something that he recommended to us. So yeah, that's kind of how we picked that out. So I'm going to shoot over to a prize wheel here that we have. Let me get it pulled up here. And as long as you are attending live right now, then you are eligible. So we'll have some people on here. I'll give it a second to pull up. So I might have to spin it a few times. We've got to make sure that somebody that wins is on with us live right now. So if it does happen to land on your name, feel free to jump over to that chat tab to let us know, hey, I'm here, I'm listening, if you win. So let's give it the first spin.
We need some Wheel of Fortune music.
All right. I don't think he is on here. Liam, if you're on here, go ahead and let us know. All right. I don't think so. I don't see him as live. So let's go ahead and give it another spin here. Sai, I know you're on here. I saw you chatting a little bit ago. Are you still here?
Sai with his broken video.
I know you were listening to our audio, but it did land on your name. Let us know if you're still here.
Yeah, I see him dialed in.
Okay, he's dialed in. Awesome. Well, congrats, Sai. We will connect with you on getting this over to you. Let's see. I think he just said, oh, thank you, Fernanda. Yeah, we'll get this over to you, Sai. Awesome. Yep, he's here. All right. We always do a giveaway at the end of our webinars. I think before, what have we done, guys, before? We've done an iPad before.
Nintendo Switch, iPad.
We did a Nintendo Switch one time. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
like
always.
I said, we're all technology guys, so we always want to do something fun. It has to plug in, or it doesn't count,
Awesome. All right. Well, Sai, like I said, we'll get that to you. Oh yeah, Troy, you did win the Switch. Awesome. I hope you're enjoying that. Yeah. Let us know what games that you've been playing, but we always love to do a giveaway at the end because we always appreciate having your time. I know with being so far into COVID, there's always so many options for webinars, but we're glad that you chose to join us. Connect with us on LinkedIn, reach out if you have any questions, and have a great rest of your week. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
everyone.